Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Now today we're focusing our entire news segment on the war in Syria. But before we look at the latest developments, our field correspondent Larry McGee has been examining the events that have led up to the U.S. becoming more involved by getting ready to send military support to the opposition in Syria. So we'll cover that in just a bit. But first, Larry, two statements that we heard leading up to the increased U.S. involvement. One was from the U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta when he described, quote, a red line. And the second was from U.S. President Barack Obama when he mentioned a game changer. Now, what were these two statements referencing?
To review, recently, U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta offered a stern warning to the Syrian government. The whole world is watching, he said, and the president has made very clear that there will be consequences, and that, he repeated, if President Assad employs chemical weapons against the Syrian rebels. The defense secretary would not speculate or comment at the time as to what those consequences might be, but stated that he thought it would be fair enough to say that employing the weapons would cross a U.S. red line. Supporting the defense secretary, President Obama, speaking from the White House, said it was obviously horrific enough when mortars were being fired on civilians and people were being indiscriminately killed. To utilize potential weapons of mass destruction on civilian populations, he commented, would cross another line with respect to international norms in international law. And that, he said, would be a game changer. Following that, in a move which unquestionably raised the stakes, Israeli aircraft were reported to have bombed Syria. U.S. officials reported that the Pentagon did believe that Israeli warplanes did enter Syria and drop multiple bombs on the warehouse believed to contain conventional weapons. This followed a prior Israeli strike on a weapons convoy in January. Jeff?
We appreciate your review, Larry.
Now, this war that began 2 years ago has been responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands and the destabilization of the entire region. We now learn that the United States is getting more involved, and the announcement was made by the White House this week that the U.S. will be sending military support to the rebels fighting against the Assad government. The decision was made after U.S. intelligence informed the Obama administration that Assad's forces have used nerve gas against rebel forces.
In a recent White House briefing, it was declared that the Syrian leadership of President Bashar al-Assad has used chemical weapons to kill opposition fighters. The U.S. Intelligence Committee says the chemical weapon sarin was used multiple times against the Syrian rebels. The estimated death from these attacks were between 100 and 150 people. The administration says this crosses the red line.
The administration announced it was approving military shipments to the opposition forces. However, it did not outline the quantity or quality of this military support or when the shipment will arrive. One final note on the U.S. involvement, the no-fly zone option remains on the table, but has not been implemented at this time, of course.
The United Nations estimated this week that the Syrian war death toll is around 93,000 so far, and these numbers are certain to rise as the fighting continues. Now, no one is sure just how many rebel fighters or government soldiers have been killed, nor is there a breakdown of the civilians who've lost their lives either.
Yeah, they seem to be the real victims in these conflicts. Despite this enormous loss of life, the opposition forces have expressed their joy at the prospect of the U.S. getting more involved. Now, some are skeptical about what they're hearing, while others are concerned that more weapons will only lead to more dead.
Many of those deaths are due in part to the supply of weapons that have been provided to the rebel fighters. As plans are being made to supply more weapons to the fighters, the concern still looms over who will actually get a hold of the weapons. Elizabeth Palmer with CBS News said in a statement that it's going to be impossible to keep track of these weapons.
Despite the increased supply of weapons to the rebels, Assad's troops have made significant gains over the past several weeks, due in part to the strong militia backed by Iran, or Hezbollah. And that's why there's an urgency behind this initiative to supply assistance to the rebels, because any victory by the Assad regime is seen as a victory for Iran. And because, of course, Iran's support of the Assad government.
As Larry stated in his report, President Obama said the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime against the Syrian people was a red line. Well, it appears that that red line has been crossed, and that's why he decided to send weapons support to the rebels in their fight against the Syrian leader. U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes said the increase would be dramatic, but not to expect dramatic results.
Food, medical supplies, and military gear, including armored vehicles, would be part of their supply that the U.S. would be sending. The CIA will be responsible for supplying small arms ammunition and anti-tank missiles to the rebels. CIA also seems pretty confident that they can keep these weapons away from extremists, as they're obviously worried about it getting in the wrong hands. And Deputy Rhodes also said, we have a relationship in Syria that we didn't have 6 months ago, that we can get weapons into Syria and into the right hands and not falling into the hands of the extremists.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Martin Dempsey, didn't share that confidence, saying it's more confusing today than it was 6 months ago. Also to note, currently American troops are conducting a training exercise with F-16 fighters and air defense missiles in Jordan, and those fighters and missiles are expected to stay behind when that exercise ends. So despite this setup in support, the U.S. still does not intend to establish a no-fly zone over Syria, as we mentioned.
Deputy Rhodes also said another long-term military engagement in the Middle East is not in the national interest. But concerning Syria, he nor any other official can answer that famous question from the Iraq War, which was, tell me how this ends.
How does it end?
Oh, that's right. Well, Jeff, and of course all of our viewers, believe it or not, there is a man who can tell this world and the governments how these things will end, and that's Yisrael Hawkins. Now, as we've brought out before, Yisrael Hawkins wrote in the late 1970s concerning the prophecies in the Middle East, and this was written in his books, The Mark of the Beast. There's 2 volumes, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Now, that along with the more recent book, Birth of the Nuclear Baby, The Explosion of Sin, can equip even the most scriptural beginner with enough knowledge to save them from the destruction that all mankind is facing at this time.
And remember, if you have not yet requested your free Prophetic Word magazine or monthly newsletter, please write the House of Yahweh and request it today. You can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. Or you can call them at 1-800-613-9494. You can also visit them on their website at www.yahweh.com or www.yisraelhawkins.com. You can email them at info@yahweh.com. And for any calls that are outside the United States, you can call the number that's on your screen.
Now grab a pencil, paper, and your holy scriptures, and prepare yourself to hear the voice of the one crying out in the wilderness, Yisrael Hawkins. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.